good. All right, thank you all. We have our 6 o'clock joint meeting for the MBTA community zoning, in-person public workshop number 2. Emily is going to start us off, give us a brief overview of it, and we'll get going. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Emily Ennis with Ennis Associates. I'm here with my colleague Chris Harlick from RKG Associates, and we're the consultant team for this project. My plan today is to take you through a lot of information, but all of that is going to get to the point at which you will be able to unveil the maps on your table, discuss them, and give us your thoughts. So I'm just going to take you through a couple of things. We're going to talk a little bit about what we learned from the first public workshop in February. Then we're going to talk about what, where, and how many, and this is a zoning study. So what we're trying to do to get from the public input, from the research that we've been doing, is how do we write zoning that will control future development. So I'm going to walk through some of the steps for that. We'll have the discussion among yourselves, the report back, and some Q&A in amongst all of that. So let me talk to you a little bit about the planning process that's happened. This is actually an evaluation of originally of the draft smart growth overlay district that the town had been working on, and the Village Common for Littleton Common form-based code for the compliance with the MBTA Multifamily Act, MBTA Communities Multifamily Act. And this is a new legislation that is asking communities that have either MBTA stations or bus routes or whatever within their communities or adjacent to them to actually create districts that allow for multifamily zoning. And depending on what type of MBTA station you have, there are certain requirements. And we went through all of that in February. So the first thing that we wanted to do is look at whether or not the districts comply. And the Littleton Common zoning is fine. The Littleton Station, the 40R zoning, is not. It does not, that draft does not comply. So one of the things we're looking for is, do we tweak that? Do we do something else? And the public input is going to help us decide that. So we're still evaluating which zoning changes are required, and that is part of what we're talking with all of you tonight about. Then, which changes will the community support? Because obviously zoning has to go through town meeting. So understanding what it is that the community finds preferable, again, that's part of what you're helping with us tonight. And then we've got to start drafting some of that zoning for further review. So we are here on March 8th for the public meeting. You can see that puts us roughly halfway through once we finish this and the associated questionnaire, which I'll be talking about tonight. Then this is the current schedule, so I have to continue working on the draft and the elements, and Maren and I will be going back and forth on the initial drafts. We'll be making a presentation to the Planning Board in April, and then moving forward to, again, according to the schedule for a town meeting on May 1st. So on February 9th, we started off with a review that the work that the town has done to date, because there's been a lot of planning that the town has already done, both for King Street Common, that particular district, and for Littleton Station. We don't like to start new if there's work that's already been done. We summarized the requirements of the MBTA Communities Act, and so I'm not going to go into that today, but the presentation, both in PowerPoint format, or PDF format actually, and the actual verbal presentation is online, so feel free to look that up. I've also got some resources at the end of this document. This PDF will also go online, and so you're free to go and look at those resources as well. We showed the results of the compliance model. Now this model is what DHCD is using to test that the districts that are submitted by the communities do actually comply. But it's great because it allows us to test different iterations of the zoning to see if they comply before the town submits to DHCD. So we used the compliance model on King Street Common and on 3 sub-districts for Littleton Station. We'll talk about that today to see what that did. And then we talked about different housing types. So a lot of people, when they think of multifamily housing, they have an image in their head. I always get the image in my head if I'm not paying attention to what I'm thinking of. There's some housing that was done in, I don't know, maybe 2011, 2012 on 95 it's quite large, and it's right on the edge. I'm like, oh, multifamily housing. But in fact, there's a wide variety of multifamily housing out there. The way the legislation describes it, or defines it, is 3 or more units. So your typical triple-decker in the city counts as multifamily housing. Now, when you get to a suburban or a rural area, because some of the adjacent communities are a little bit more rural, then we look at different typologies. We're not looking for 7-story multifamily housing that would happen in Cambridge or Somerville. We're not even necessarily looking at those old triple-deckers, although there are some in some communities in Massachusetts. So what we did in February is we tested different types of multifamily housing, built ones, not just illustrations, to see what people liked or didn't like. And then actually we carried those through. Those of you who might have been at the February 9th meeting, you're going to see those again today. So we had that discussion. So I'm going to take you from where we were then, kind of to where we're going today in terms of thinking about what types of housing goes where, and how much of it, or how many of those. So the results of the compliance model said basically if you include the King Street Common as part of your MBTA district, which would make a lot of sense, it's a little bit higher density, then you can actually reduce the density. And by density, what we mean is the total number of dwelling units per acre. Around Littleton Station, you can reduce that density. So the MBTA Communities Act requires that you have an average density of 15 units per acre. So if it's higher than that at King Street, which it is, it can be lower than that at Littleton Station. And so it looks like about an average density of 9 to 12 dwelling units per acre would make sense. So when you think about that, what that means is about 300 dwelling units at Littleton Station. So that's the how much, how many part of the equation. Now, you do have a minimum required unit capacity of 150 units. So DHCD looks at it and says you have a station within a half mile of the station. We want to make sure that Littleton, given its size and the type of station it has 150 units within that, and you have a minimum acre of 10 acres, giving you 15 dwelling units per acre. I'm liking the easy math, frankly. But what you find is that doesn't get you up to the 15 units per acre because you don't have a single lot that's just 10 units there. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I'm showing you the sub-districts. The requirements are that you zone, for a whole lot. You can't just split a lot off. And so when you see the areas that we're looking at, that will make more sense. But I want to call that to your attention right now.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, are we taking questions now or later?
Not until the end.
Not until the end? Okay.
Yeah, Emily has a couple different places for questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
We may have questions that aren't necessarily in places that she has put them.
Well, let's let her finish her presentation
Okay.
first.
It might come clearer as I go through it, but then what I'll do is I'll stop and ask questions after I get a little bit further, or ask if there are questions, sorry, as I get a little bit further. So these were the typologies, the housing types that we tested at the last meeting. And what we did is we had an in-meeting poll that was, actually it was hosted by SurveyMonkey. And what that meant was that people who were watching the meeting either at home, so not through the Zoom link, or after the meeting was over, so watching it in rotation on local cable access, could still participate in the survey. So we had 21 people who attended the meeting online on February 9th, and we had another 6 people actually take the survey afterwards. So the numbers, for any of you who might have been on the February 9th call, or at that online meeting, these numbers will be different from what you saw there because 6 additional people took it. So this is what we saw. So we tested 2 different types of either duplexes or triplexes. There were duplexes that could easily become three units. And what you see there is the one that almost 78% of the people who responded liked. We tested 3 different types of 4 families, and so the one that you're seeing up there has the highest positive response. We then tested 2 different types of height, and height is important in terms of thinking about how you place the buildings on the site. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, so you can see the height that was preferred. And then we talked about 2 different ways of clustering building types. So clustering 3 families or 4 families, clustering townhouses. And so in poll 4 and poll 5, poll 4 tested 2 different types of just clustered housing, but no sort of public amenity around it. Poll 5 rather, tested multifamily clusters that were built around courtyards and with nearby amenities. So you see the preferred. And again, this was 27 people over a period. It's a snapshot. It's not that we take this and say, 27 people responded, this is definitely what Littleton wants. It's just, of the people that were there, this is what we heard, and so we use it to test further. So I'm going to take us back in time a little bit as we start to think more about how the how many and the where component comes through. But before I do that, are there questions on what you've heard so far?
Yeah.
I think you mentioned it first, and then I'll come back to you.
Yes, so I don't understand how you are now saying that Littleton Station should have up to 300 units when we were at 150 the last meeting. So that's a doubling of the number, and so there's some wrong math going on there.
I am happy to explain that. I think there's some numbers later on here that will better explain it. So if you don't mind, I'm going to explain it when I get to that next section, because I have the numbers from the last meeting in there. And I think it would be more helpful for you to see that on screen when I explain that. So, but I will address that question. Yes.
I'm a little confused about your definitive of what the state requires when they haven't even formally drafted the laws. It's still in draft format. They have not finalized it. They've changed it twice now, and yet you're speaking definitively as this is what is required.
Okay. Good, very good question. So there are a couple of different components. There is the legislation, which has been passed and is finalized. So that was passed as of December of 2020. The draft guidelines were issued last year. The initial final guidelines were released in August of last year, and then there was an update on one component of the guidelines. So the legislation obviously is passed by the legislature. DHCD is required to create the regulations about how the legislation will be implemented. So that's the compliance guidelines. And there is, in the other presentation, there's a set of terminology for all of these, so I encourage you all to look at that one. The compliance guidelines were released in August, and then one portion relating to affordability requirements was updated in October, but those are all final.
They only say draft. There is no final
There-
registered with the state.
They are, the legislation is in place, and
The
the final,
legislation is totally
and the
different from
final
regulations.
and the final guidelines have been issued.
Yes.
So it is a definite, this is not a maybe.
Yeah, so this is moving.
I'm surprised because the state still lists them as draft.
I have not seen draft on, I mean, I'm happy to go back and check. I'm not going to do it now while we're talking, but the last time I spoke to DHCD, those are final, so I'm happy. Was it, yes, sir, you had a question?
So for the train station area,
Yes.
you've identified 3 plots, 3
Yes.
districts. And those are each in complete ownership? I mean, I look at what the requirements are, that we minimally have to have 150 units within that area on 10 acres. So what I question myself is, why don't we identify 10 acres and have 150 units and meet the 15 units per acre? So I back up and say, okay, what makes up those 3 districts? Are each of those districts in complete ownership, and therefore you can't subdivide or zone in a smaller area than that whole district?
Mhm. Also a good question. I'm going to be able to answer both of your questions in a minute because I have those numbers on some slides coming up.
But
So-
those 3 districts are each
Yep. I'm going to show them to you.
complete parcels.
Right, yes,
Okay,
I'm going to
not
show them to
collection
you.
of parcels.
Some of the 2 of the districts are single parcels. One of the districts has multiple parcels in it, and I've got maps I'm going to show to you in a minute that have those on them so that you can see them.
Okay, just so I follow, which district is it has multiple?
I will show you on the maps.
Okay.
It will be easier for you to see than me to say this one, and then this one, and then this one, so. So I'm going to step back a little bit to 2020, because as I said, the town has already been planning for this area. There was a planning process that the planning board went through. The images I'm going to show you in a minute are from the final presentation in 2019, and then there was a report that was presented all around this. I should not wave my hands so much. So the presentation included, as it says up there, a conceptual plan, illustrative plans, and estimates of building volume, which I find very helpful because it allows us to compare what the town has already looked at with what we're thinking about now. And all of the documents for that planning process are online. I pulled them from the town's website. So again, anybody who wants to go backwards can see those. So this was the conceptual plan in 2020, that presentation of 2019, and then the plan itself was approved in 2020. And I know it doesn't read as well up here, but obviously this will be online. And what I'm showing you are two different parts of the plan. One is this diagram, we call them bubble diagrams, and it shows roughly where uses could be. And then the second thing on the right-hand side is what's called an illustrative plan. I'm going to blow this up in a minute. And by blow this up, I mean I'm going to make the image larger and zoom in. An illustrative plan tries to show where buildings and circulation will happen so people can have an idea of how it might look. So bubble diagram, just general locations. This illustrative plan gives the building. And I've called out so you can see from plan to plan where different sort of landmarks are to help. So at the top, we've got the Life Care Center of Neshoba Valley is up here. The middle one is the intersection of Foster Street and Balsam Lane. Down here is a commuter rail platform on either side. Down here is the intersection of Foster Street and Taylor Street. And finally, the intersection of Taylor Street and Hill Road. So you can just see from where to where that plan took place. And then this is me zooming in a little bit. So the illustrative plan detailed north. That's the Life Care Center of Neshoba Valley down to the commuter rail platform. And then south is actually just above. We've got the intersection of Foster Street and Taylor Street, and then Taylor Street and Hill Road here, just to orient yourselves on this. And then because they had the development volume, again, in illustrative form, we can look and see what that means. So Plan North is, and Plan South are, I've taken this from the slides there, and you can see that at that time they were looking at 38,000 square feet of commercial space, including the train station, and about 450 units. On Plan South, they were looking at 110,000 square feet of commercial space and 453 units, for a total of 903 units. Now, this is important. It's an illustrative plan, but what they're basically doing is what we call a fit study, which is they're saying, if you have this many parcels, this is how much can fit in these areas. And so they're looking at, they're not saying this is going to be developed. It's saying based on what we've heard and what we've discussed, this is the sort of thing that can fit where. So, okay, hang on, let me just jump back. So this is where I can get to some of the numbers that you asked about earlier. So we showed this slide at the last meeting, at the February 9th meeting. And these are the three districts that you asked about. District 1, which is this single parcel, this yellow parcel up here. District 2, which is on the, hang on, I don't know why it wants to tell me what I'm looking at. Thank you, PDS. This is on the other side of the train platform right here. It's a couple of parcels there. And then District 3 is a couple of parcels down here at the Taylor and Foster Street intersection right there. So those were the three districts that we looked at. And then to your question, earlier, this was the density that we calculated for each. So we have 35.3 acres in District 1. It had a potential capacity of 423 units, and this is based on the compliance model, which gives us a potential density of 12.5 units per acre. 2 was 11.5 acres, a potential capacity of 138, potential density of 12 units per acre. And then 3, 30.7 acres, potential capacity of 360 units, potential density of 12.9 units per acre. So this is where, and that totals, if you were to zone for all of those at multiple, at the maximum capacity, it'd be 929 dwelling units. Now, where the difference is between the 300 units and the 150 is that's when we get to the dwelling units per acre calculation. So the requirement is for that average 15 dwelling units per acre. When we did the assessment at the last meeting, we said that you needed to be between 9 and 12 dwelling units per acre. If you take the parcel size here, of each of these districts, they're larger than 10 acres, which means in order to get to 9 to 12 dwelling units per acre, you're going to have take us back to math. I have never used the words numerator and denominator so much since I left school. Your numerator is the number of dwelling units. Your denominator is the number of acres. If you have a higher denominator, a higher number of acres, you're going to need a higher number of dwelling units. So to get to about 300 dwelling units, it will depend on the number at a density of 9 to 12 units per acre. You're going to have that higher number of acreage. Now, you asked, sir, about why don't we just do a 10-acre parcel?
Mhm.
The trouble is, for the compliance model, you have to use entire parcels. It's one of the rules. So you can't just pick a parcel and say, I'm going to carve out 10 acres of this parcel and call that our district. You have to zone entire parcels, which is basically just good planning practice. Having split zones across parcels is not good planning
So,
practice.
okay, that was the question I had,
Yes.
these complete parcels, but one of these districts is an aggregate of several parcels.
Yes,
Is
and that's
that three?
completely allowed, yes. You can have an aggregate of multiple parcels, and that.
I'm just asking, which one is it?
Oh, 2, number 2.
Which color is that?
Green, sorry, yes, I forget, it's a little fuzzy.
Right.
around there.
Is it 3 multiple parcels too?
Sorry, and 3, yes. 3 is 2 parcels?
Two parcels.
3, actually, there's another parcel line down, 2 parcels there. And then 2 is 3 parcels, just to make
The
it.
green is 3.
Green is 3, the red is 2.
So,
Right, so
Yes.
if you have to do whole parcels, if you choose the yellow, you have to have more units. If you're looking for reducing the units here, given that we have some on the common area, could you not look at green and increase the density?
We're going to talk about that, because that is an excellent question. Yes, sir?
Couldn't you also make District 3 into 3 districts? Isn't it 3A, 3B, 3C if there's 3 different parcels there? You don't have to make the
Can't you
whole.
just use one of them?
We're also going to talk about that, because I'm going to tell you about the pros and cons of this. So the answer is yes, you could zone different parcels different ways. That's true, but it's more than just the zoning, because when you're zoning for something, the expectation is that at some point, something's going to be built, right? So you also have to think of other considerations about the zoning. That's where we get to the pros and cons of these different parcels. You're remembering, we are listening to everything you say, and so what we talk about tonight makes its way into the final
Can
zone.
I back us up for a
Yeah.
second? One of the biggest concerns for myself, and I think several people in the room, is Foster Street.
Mhm.
And the fact that Foster Street is what Foster Street is.
Yes.
There is a couple of parcels over on Taylor Street at the intersection of Porter Street. I don't understand why those parcels aren't being considered. They are off Taylor Street, they're big enough, they're dry enough, there are businesses located there currently. Why are those parcels not being considered?
I'm going to talk my way through what we have now. Now, Taylor and Porter Street.
They're in your presentation from last
Right.
time. They are included in that elliptical.
Are they the red parcels here?
No.
Okay,
No.
yes, I couldn't
No.
remember.
No, they're not.
no, they're not any of those 3 is what she's
Right,
saying.
they're
Okay.
outside.
Outside.
Are they outside the half mile? That's what I
No,
was
they are
going to
not.
ask you.
They are in your elliptical.
That was my attempt at GIS when the law first came out.
The regulations were quite clear that the half mile extended from the furthest part of the railway station. So-
If the town so chooses, correct.
And so if you do that, then those pieces are included according to,
So what you're asking is, should Taylor and Porter, I think we can take that back and just see where Taylor and Porter are from there, and then we can draw the
Right.
radius and just double check.
from the northern or whatever tip that is, or the upper tip from your map. They're well within your half-mile circle.
Okay.
And that would get it off Foster Street, which will relieve a whole lot of tension and unhappiness.
I have not checked the distances myself, so we would have to do that. I can't talk about it tonight without checking it, but that is helpful information, we're taking it down, so I appreciate that. So, but your point about Foster Street is a really good one. You know, one of the things that we want to do is minimize the impact. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons of each of these parcels. So because Chris and I and our other colleague Eric did go back and forth on what we should show for tonight as a test for the discussion. And again, we're hoping that you're going to give us feedback pro and con on this. That's why we're here. So in terms of District 1, it has a huge advantage in that it is adjacent to the MBTA parking lot and the commuter rail station, right? Is if you build something there, you can walk straight down from there to the commuter rail platform. It is relatively flat land, although there are some wetland constraints on it, but from a development perspective, it's got some positives there. The wetland constraints, and you can see, and you will see again, hopefully you can see that there's this little shaded area in here. That is a constraint on the calculations that we have to be aware of. It does have potential access on Foster Street. You're going to see when we show you ARPIT studies how we took that into consideration. And again, we're interested in your input on that. District 2 actually has quite awkward access. It is a long, thin lot next to the railroad tracks, and District 2 again is the green. It's got one sort of tiny little access right after an intersection, which is not ideal. And as a longer, thinner lot, it's a little bit more difficult to develop. So, you know, we wanted to keep that in mind. SGOD 3, District 3, which is the red down here, has existing office and R&D use. It does have some wetland constraints on it. And we actually looked at, Chris did some infill tests on that to see could you fit a couple of the higher density buildings in there, maybe with a nice setback from the street. And the placement of the existing buildings and the wetlands is a little tricky. And so, you know, that's why we didn't choose it for a test today. We did note that when you go back to the Littleton Station Master Plan that, you know, there was quite a bit of discussion around having mixed use there, and that was what was shown on the FIT studies. As I will show you tonight from the work that we're testing with you today, by using the district that we're planning on using, which I'll tell you is District 1, the yellow district, it does mean that District 3 is left open for future development. Now, we also tested what would happen if you did 1, so the yellow, and 3, the red, and because now you've got a lot more land, you have to perk your number of units up even higher. So we did not want to do that. So why District 1? So as I mentioned, it's adjacent to the MBTA parking lot. The access to Foster Street that you will see on this test is further away from the intersection with Grimes Lane. So there's a little bit more room for cars to maneuver, and it's safer, makes a safer intersection. The layout of the site, or the way that we're looking at it, it allows a significant buffer from the existing homes, which was important. It also allows quite a bit of a setback from Foster Street, which was equally important, provided the walkable access to the train station. And there are some opportunities for low-scale retail and services there. Yes, ma'am?
What does significant setback mean in, like, meters, yards, whatever?
It depends on which of the scenarios that you look at. So, and we'll hear from you whether or not you agree that it's significant. I will say in one of the scenarios, it is not a significant setback. So that becomes important in the discussion. It has that capacity of 428 units, but that's more than we actually need. So we're going to show you some options there. And as I said, it preserves 2 and 3 for future conversations about land use. So really, it was just looking at the characteristics of the districts. It's a little bit more flexible for development. It provides a potentially safer traffic option, although this isn't really about traffic. So let me take you through the 3 different illustrative scenarios, and you will see when you look at this that there's an illustrative purpose only. We are doing zoning here. We are not doing a development proposal. This is just to test what types of units would fit on the site and how they would fit on the site. We tried to retain most of the original circulation pattern from the 2020 plan just to see how it would work, and I will expand this in a minute. I'm going to show you every one of the scenarios in both this plan and in a bird's eye view so you get a better sense of the buildings. And the buildings are modeled on the choices that were preferred in the previous planning scenario. So this option A, which is the higher of the 3 options, has approximately 400 units in it. Couple of things I want to call out. So we do, in this one, we have a little bit of a mixed use here with 2 units above and cafe and maybe a small piece of retail. We restricted the access to it. It has to be through the MBTA parking lot. So you cannot access that cafe or the parking from the cafe from Foster Street. We have 1 entry from Foster Street, and all of the traffic would have to go in and out. Now you see that we do have a loop to the MBTA parking lot. You could close that loop off with bollards that are responsive to emergency vehicles only, so they'll drop if you have to get a fire truck or an ambulance in there, but otherwise they would prevent vehicular access. But the sidewalks are important for walkability. And then finally, I mentioned that little bump out there. For those of you who are more technically minded, there's something called excluded land that comes out of that denominator. And that represents 1.54 acres of excluded land. So just saying. I also mentioned the buffers. This buffer here is approximately 75 feet. We measured the buffers from the houses on that side of Foster Street, and they ranged between about 75 to 100 feet, so we chose 75. And then the buffer between this and the retail is about 50 feet, which is about the same as the buffer across the street. So you were asking about what we mean by significant buffers. We tried to use what was already there. And this is a bird's eye of it, and you can see, or would be able to if it was a little clearer, that you can see that some of the buildings represent what we heard from you, heard from the public at the last meeting. So this gets us to about 12 to 13 dwelling units per acre at 400 units. We're also showing 350 units, and so this is the plan. Now I'm going to pull this up in a minute, but you see that we retained this circulation, but it comes out a little bit here into this kind of cul-de-sac, and you're probably wondering why with fewer buildings, there's more spread out. It's because a lot of those buildings are shorter. And so one of the things we want to hear from you today is that there's a trade-off between the height and the number of units in the building and the amount of land that's needed. Interestingly, one of the choices that we offered in February was a 4-building, 189-unit development that actually used up relatively little land. But it was 4 stories high, and not everybody liked 4 stories, so it didn't rank as highly. But if you spread it out, you do use more land. And I mentioned that not all the buffers were significant. You see by pushing this out, by needing to use more land for shorter buildings, that it does get closer to the existing housing. So that's a trade-off that we need to consider.
How close is that?
I didn't measure it.
25 feet?
No, well, from the
housing
to the property line, it's about 70 feet.
70 feet. Okay. Thank you for
And a
this.
question.
Yeah.
The blue rectangles behind each of the buildings, what are
Parking.
those? It looks like they're not connected to the road, so how would you?
Oh, it's a
get-
conceptual plan, so we just tried to sketch in what parking would look like, yes. Yeah, no, you're not trying to teleport your car over the house. It's just, we wanted to get a sense that we were thinking about parking.
Yeah,
But,
would enough space for parking be available?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, the actual circulation is very, not worth detailing.
The actual circulation, yeah, it would, this isn't about the circulation, it's about the layout, but we wanted to show that we were it was about how many units you could get on and reasonably estimate the parking, so. And it's why the circulation mostly remains the same. So that gets us to about 10 to 11 dwelling units per acre, and I should say that all 3 of the options that we're showing with King Street, based on our current calculations, would comply with the MBTA Communities Act in terms of the numbers. So option C is about 300 units, and there's a few sort of minor differences. Obviously, there are fewer units. We've pulled them back from the neighborhood. This has no retail cafe. So the higher and the medium do have that retail cafe. This does not. And it's not much. You'll see when you see your sheets there that the retail cafe is
We're
about
still
2,500.
talking about the same parcel.
Yes, this is all the same parcel, just showing you the different density levels of how that could work. So with that, here's the bird's eye of how that looks. Again, you don't see the retail component there, but the layout is all the same and it's still all the same parcel. You will also notice, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but it's true of all of them, that you'll see that a lot of the larger scale buildings, more units, higher, are focused on placing them closer to the commuter rail and closer to the highway rather than towards the neighborhood. So we tried to be sensitive about how that would work as well and show that it would be possible to do that. Yes?
I know that the property drops off back there. About where is that roughly on the sketch? Where that hill starts to fall down towards the highway?
It's like in,
Yeah, absolutely. Is that top button there?
so it really starts to drop off kind of midway through here. So there's a slope that starts down this way, and then it's kind of flat in this area, and then it starts sloping down from here. So really, these buildings along this bottom side of the street, and then these buildings closest to the commuter rail and the highway, those are at the lowest point.
And you used that a little bit.
I did.
It's not apparent on here, but you
Yeah.
used that when you were citing the larger buildings.
Yeah, exactly. So part of the thinking also with the larger buildings in that position is because it is sloped so much, you don't feel that fourth floor with that larger apartment building. In fact, from the street, you would think it's a 3-story building because the drop-off is between 10 and 20 feet, so you have essentially on the back side of the building a whole floor of units that you would never know is there if you're looking at it from the sidewalk.
But the place you would look at it most frequently would be from 495.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. If you could see it from 495 through the trees, which we haven't done a 495 view study, but that would be I'm sure a developer that would come in with a proposal for something this size would be happy to provide something like that.
Now, I mentioned some of these components earlier, the idea of the buffers, the idea of the setbacks from the street, using the bollards and all that, because there is opportunity in zoning to do what's called development standards. So you notice we haven't talked about stormwater or wastewater. We haven't really talked about circulation. We certainly haven't talked about landscaping other than, putting the trees in to indicate that that's important. And that's because that would be a next stage of figuring out what are the important development standards that you put in so that under a site plan review process, those can be checked. And so all of those components do go into the zoning language, but they're not talked about in terms of actually calculating it at the time you do zoning. That's done at the time of a proposal coming
You're
in.
aware that Littleton does not have town sewage.
Yes.
So any 450 lot development is going to have its own sewage treatment plant.
Yes, but again, that's not dealt with in zoning. So,
I mean,
I
it's certainly
completely
a factor.
understand your question and
And
the
you-
point that you're making, but it's not a zoning component.
You keep referring to a previous plan that was withdrawn because of public outcry. So basing your new work on a public plan that was withdrawn because of public outcry doesn't seem to be the best.
So what we're trying to do is show the differences between what was previously proposed and what the options are now, and then hear from you back as to what you think of those options. So that's why we
Let's see
did
the
that.
other 2 tracks.
That was it, that was it.
You're
So-
not showing us any options for the other 2?
We're not,
Why?
because with this one, you get to where you need to be. We're
But-
trying to show you that rather than developing out all 3 parcels, you have the option of just doing one.
But I think we've heard tonight that, at least from several of us, we've heard tonight that we'd actually like to see that kind of a proposal for the red plots.
Okay, so that's very helpful for us to know. So when you
Right?
get to writing things down.
Because that
Yeah.
plot has direct access out onto Taylor Street,
Mhm.
right? It keeps traffic almost completely off of Foster. So the idea that we're only looking at an undeveloped green plot of land versus a currently developed plot of land of almost equivalent size, right? You could
So
almost
actually,
put
yeah,
this
look at that.
exact same thing down in the red plot.
Sorry, I'm making you all dizzy, I know. So 30 acres versus 35.3.
We could certainly get our 150 units down on that red plot.
It'll have to be more because it's more than 10
I
acres.
get
Not
that.
if we, not if we don't use all three plots that that's made up of.
So then we would have to do the study to understand where the wetlands are, because they have more wetlands, and you can't, the wetlands come out of the denominator. So we have to do that study. Now, what I'm hearing from you is that you're interested in seeing that, and that's fine, that's
Well, the
great.
only reason I'm even
Helpful.
bringing it
Yeah.
up is, to Cheryl's point, that prior proposal was gonna be brought to town meeting, and it was pulled by the town because of the outcry of
So
residents.
it's going to be worse this time. There's no way it would succeed.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I
I'll
don't
be
know that
out there.
there's no way, we
well,
can't speak to the
I
town.
can't speak to that, but I'll be out there.
There will be an
picketing,
outcry.
And I'll be paying for lawn signs
But see,
along with other people.
but what I'm saying is, this is exactly what we're wanting to hear from
Okay,
you tonight.
so-
So this is terrific, because we haven't written the zoning yet, right? We're still looking to get public input, and so what I'm hearing you say is, yes, Emily, we'll be happy to look at the drawings that you did and give us our opinion, but we'd really like you and Chris and Eric to go back and look at the red parcels. That's extremely useful. Yes, I know you want to speak, that gentleman hasn't spoken.
Well,
Go ahead.
continuing on this theme here, given the previous history here, why did you guys start with that one?
Because it's adjacent to the commuter rail station, and people could walk from the commuter rail station from their homes. We were looking at that, that is essentially it, is trying to create a walkable neighborhood that allowed people to walk and use the commuter rail station while being sensitive about access on Foster Street, making sure that the MBTA parking lot, that stays where it is, introducing only one new entry onto Foster Street, making sure that that was set back far enough, making sure that we were cognizant of what the houses and the setbacks were on Foster Street already, so you're not putting the greatest need. So I understand that everybody's worried about Foster Street, but what I'm trying to say is that we tried to take at least some of that into consideration and show you what it would be like close to the station for the people who would be living there, assuming anybody builds under the zoning. Yes, ma'am?
So, the idea is that the zone that you're describing
Yep.
would put fewer cars total on the road because it would be more walkable.
That would be part of it,
And
yes.
then the other parcel would potentially have more cars on the road, but they wouldn't be on Foster Street as much. That's the,
That,
that's sort of
yeah,
the trade-off.
that's a great way of thinking about it. Although, it depends on where they're going from and to. They
Right.
might still use Foster Street, they just wouldn't necessarily be turning in at that point.
Coming, yeah.
Yeah.
One other thing I did want to mention
Yeah.
that Emily has previously talked about with the red parcels in SGOD number 3, is that there are some large existing businesses there. And development there, residential development there would, based on our understanding of the site so far, pretty much have to displace those businesses. And so that might be
Well,
a
it would
choice that.
displace the businesses only when the businesses chose to be done with their business, right? I
It's
mean,
a
it
zoning
doesn't
thing.
require them to stop business. They could operate their business there for another 20 years.
Until somebody
Oh.
made an offer, yes,
Yeah.
yes, that is
Or
true.
5 years,
Yeah.
or whenever they decided they wanted to do something different with their land, whoever owns it.
But I think the overall point that I'm hearing from the people who have spoken so far is you want us to look at the red parcels, and I think that's fine. We don't have
And
an
the
objection
green
to that.
parcel. Quite frankly, what I'd like you to take away from this is, we're looking for minimum impact. We're looking for minimum housing. We're looking for the very bare minimum that could fulfill what the state requires. Because we have, Foster Street is a very old road. People own right up to the edges of the pavement. There's any widening of that road beyond up north of the train station, beyond the train station, that's different. This side of the train station, any widening would require taking land by eminent domain. There are no sidewalks. That would require taking land by eminent domain. People have very narrow front yards. It would affect their property values dramatically if you took that much land from them and widened that road. So we're looking for the very bare minimum that can be done if we choose to comply with the state.
That is very helpful to hear, and with that, I'm going to ask you to turn your maps over, because I want this in writing.
So, anyway, we have a couple of questions.
Yeah,
up here. Go
please,
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead, Anna.
So I think it's important to say that based off what we've just heard, to backtrack it a little bit in terms of using the presentation from 2020, a lot has changed in those 3 years. And so I think in 2020, there's no way we could have anticipated that the IBM folks are going to be leaving and, oh my gosh, we're going to have housing there. I don't think anybody could have ever imagined that. But the fact that we do, I concur with what Ms. Cowley is saying, that we want to be able to go back to that 150 number, because that has been what was demonstrated or what was provided to us at the last meeting as being the calculated number that's necessary. Okay, I think everybody kind of throws up their arms and says, well, if that's all we need, fine, then we'll have to figure out how to get that. But anything more than that, I think is going to be an incredibly big nut to swallow, and one that folks just aren't going to be willing to tolerate. So that's why I would also agree with looking at the green and the pink
Yeah.
ones, just simply because that allows us to utilize, as you said, the whole parcel or the whole district needs to be utilized, so.
And please do add in the Taylor Street border.
We'll do your radius and see what it looks like.
So let me get, I just have.
Yes, I'm deferring to the chair.
Of course.
So when we originally looked at this a couple of years ago, we were at 500 to 600 units. We included high-rises there because we didn't have the benefit of what was going on in the common. And that's how we started, and everyone was up in arms because it was 300-400 units of high-rise stuff. You got to remember, too, we have two different animals we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a zoning regulation that the state's going to like for us to include as part of the train station, the MBTA. And I agree with Anna. I think everybody here can tolerate 150 units. I think I would rather see 150 units on 30 acres, because we don't care about the density. We'll zone it and say there's 300 units there, but eventually we're only going to build 150. I would rather see it on a big parcel than try to squeeze 150 on 11 acres. We could still have it all spread out. It'll look like Durkee Farm across the way. They'll just be smaller units.
So I will admit that we got caught out by this. The first test was to put 150 acres on those 30 units, and then when we went back and we did the math, we realized that what happens is that gives you a density of approximately 5 dwelling units per acre, which when you average it with the King Street Common, means that you are now below 15 units per acre and you're non-compliant.
No, but
So here, this is what I'm saying, is that if you put if you zone for 150 acres on those two larger parcels, the yellow and the red, you will not be in compliance.
But if you zone for 300 there and you make it as part of our conditions of approval that you're only going to get 150, and we still win on both of them. That's what I'm trying to say. We can still spread them out. I think everybody agrees 150 is all we really want out there.
Then we will be able to look at the green parcel, which would allow you to get to the correct density. If you put a unit cap of 150 on those 30-plus acres, you will not be in compliance.
One of the things that I really like about the green and the red one is that those already have infrastructure in place. And so that makes it a lot easier to be able to develop, and it doesn't touch the green space until that particular landowner decides to do something differently with it. So that's my perspective on it.
So let me make sure I've got this straight. The green, can you go back to the map?
Yes, of course.
So this area right here, we could build 150 units right here and be in compliance, correct?
We have not tested to see if you can fit 150 units, but mathematically, 150 divided by 11, I'm not sure if that gets you, I have to do it.
But that's still going to come out on Foster Street.
Yes, it's going to come out on Foster Street, and it's going to come out right.
So
It's
11
not
point-
great access is why, and that's why we didn't choose it for our test.
But couldn't we, earlier you
improve
had
the
mentioned
access.
that the red, couldn't we, these are really 3 parcels, right?
Yeah, I was thinking there was a parcel line there.
So couldn't we just take 2 of the 3 and put 150 units there?
We
Or
could.
one of the 3 and only the ones that abut Taylor Road?
We can test those other options, yes.
So one
I mean, I
other,
can't answer that because we haven't tested them, we don't know where the wetlands.
Right.
We have to look at where the wetlands are with, the respective parcels and test that.
Well,
But yes,
I think
it is
what
an
you're.
option to look at.
Okay, so what you're hearing from us is that, I think from everybody, we only want 150 units because of King Street.
That's
So,
what I'm hearing, yes.
will the state allow us to do this if we have say that green is zone industrial right now?
Mhm.
If we go to change the zoning on it, knowing full well that whoever owns that industrial will never build on it, is the state still gonna say we're okay?
The state requires that the property be zoned to multifamily residential. It
Doesn't
is
mean we
not a
have to build
production
it.
plan.
so the other aspect of this, which I would sort of like to see in some slide, is what the existing zoning is on these parcels. Because the yellow parcel is an industrial, I want everyone to focus on this, is industrially zoned, and currently, there's huge interest in trucking, warehouse, which has happened on the other side of the interchange. That is the likely,
Trucks aren't allowed on Foster Street. So
well,
that doesn't work.
Yeah, it does, it's zone industrial, they have to be allowed to come up and down.
Foster Street does not.
I'm just saying, let's just put that into the mix. Let's just put that into the mix
During the
and let everyone understand it.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Because I would like, yes. sir.
When you calculated the density you required, you're using 550 King Street or 550 and 410? Because 410 is extremely dense already.
Yes.
It's 260 units on 4+ acres. It's 60-some units per acre, so your units per acre has to drop considerably if you can add 410 in.
We
to the
did, we
calculation.
presented that at the last meeting, so again, I encourage you to go back.
I do, I was at that last
Okay,
meeting,
great,
and I
yeah.
think your math is wrong. It wasn't, the numbers don't go down low enough, is what I'm saying. They should be way lower than they are, because 410 is so dense, right? It's got to lower, it seems like it has to lower the calculation.
We're happy to go back to
But
the.
isn't there a minimum to the state of 15 acres?
There's 15 units per acre, yes, ma'am.
So
You got
even
it.
if we get
No,
lower.
no, what I'm saying is,
For the
Just
entire,
if it's an average?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so if
Okay,
Village
so-
Common, it brings in a much higher density, that'll drop the density required here.
Right, exactly.
About 20 units.
Yes.
so I have a comment.
Yes.
Okay? And it actually is about the red parcels. And if we're talking about splitting it, I actually think that's 2 parcels, right? There's 2 buildings on there, I think they're owned by 2 different.
There are
There's a
3
little
parcels. There's
corner.
a
Okay,
single-family
the one that
residence.
is on Taylor Street, let's just talk about it for a minute. It's got a building on it. No, Taylor, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to.
The
go
other
through
end.
parcel lots, yeah.
So, my point is this. Get it zoned, it's currently commercial, industrial, whatever it is. If you zone it for the MBTA, they may never build on it. They may build on it. It may be 10, 15, 20 years from now. The whole point we're all talking about is we're going to get a whole crap load of density on King Street. We need time as a town to absorb that housing. And if they're talking about building that over 5 to 10 years, in my mind, I don't think we want anything by the train station for 5 or 10 years.
Or 30.
Well, whatever.
But you could
My
still
point
end
is,
up with it.
it gives
Not
time
if we
for
minimize it.
King Street to get built out, the
And end up
town to
with
do it,
Amazon.
and then the landowner who's now been zoned MBTA to decide he or somebody else wants to do something with that land.
Right.
It just bakes in some time.
So
Understood. Just a second, sir, you had your hand up, or looked like you were. about to
Yeah,
have your hand up.
I'd like to jump in.
And
First
then-
off, that little red parcel at the end on Taylor Street happens to be near and dear to my heart because that's what brought me to Littleton in the 1980s. I came to work for Digital on that very site. So I know the place well. But I wanted to jump back, if we could, to some basic numbers. You said you like simple numbers, me too. So the state wants 50 acres, right? And that's an important number. 50 acres. And in the original legislation, it said 50 contiguous acres, but that's kind of been walked back by the interpretation, by the idea of an overlay district, that, well, it doesn't really have to be 50, it could be 25, and then little dribs and drabs, as long as none of them individually are less than 5 acres. And then they also walked back the idea, well, it should be within half a mile. But actually, that's unless there are wetlands or unusual circumstances. And only half of it has to be within half a mile. The rest of it can be outside the half mile. And the half mile starts not from the middle of the train station, but from the most distant part. So there's been a lot of wiggle room in the interpretation that was not in the original 2020 legislation. It keeps getting kind of more and more liberal. So that's good. But let's go to the, 50 acres. So if you do the math with the 50 and the 15, you need 750 units.
Mhm.
I think I looked up, the 550 King Street is 41 acres. So hypothetically, if we found a 9-acre parcel somewhere else to create an overlay district of exactly 50 acres, 50.0 acres, the number of units that we would need on that hypothetical district is 750. We have them on the King Street parcel alone. So the number of units that you would then need on your other 9-acre parcel is 0, right?
You are almost correct, and this is the
So where-
interesting thing.
where am I wrong?
The one thing that you're missing is that depending on the type of community you are, in this case, a commuter rail station, there are proximity requirements, proximity to the commuter rail. So what you're missing is for Littleton is you have to have 10 acres within the half mile, and you need the 15 units per acre, so 150 units within that half mile. So that's why we're actually looking at this. If it were King Street alone, I think we're actually either there or close to there if it was King Street, but you've got the proximity requirement to commuter rail. So you're very close.
I spent an hour or two today looking for that
Yes.
second part that you just said. I couldn't find it, so maybe
Yeah.
offline you can point it to me.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I do have some additional resources. So I know, I hear you loud and clear. We both hear you loud and clear. You'd like us to look at the red district. You'd like us to look at the green district. Understand that. I did spend collectively with Chris a lot of time working on these, so we would like you to at least flip over and just take 10 minutes to look at what we did. And write all your comments down. That's why we're here, is to listen to this. Chris, you had something else?
Well, I just wanted to add that even though this layout that we're showing is specific to the principles can be universal. So tell us what you like about adjacencies, buildings next to each other, types of site access, types and locations of green space that's shared. The building typologies,
Yes.
we have the preference survey that we did before, but here you can kind of see it in action a little bit more. So we as we move forward, can translate these suggestions even from this site to other parcels that we're.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Can I just finish building on what Chris said? So the information, the feedback you give us on what you see here, Chris is absolutely right. We can translate that to using it to the other sites. So we would appreciate your feedback. Layout, building types, you'll see some more numbers there. Just really would like to hear about that because we can use it again. Yes, ma'am.
You should realize that the train station is on Foster Street. When it was moved there from the depot, it was promised it was only temporary, but it never stayed there. All the residents around there were not cry about it, and they promised us it would not stay there. I was at that meeting.
I had not heard that.
No, I
And
didn't
so,
have that one either. Can we?
when we focus on Foster Street, and we get protective of Foster Street, it's there now. Maybe we could petition the state to move it. I'm not beyond that. That would certainly give us lots of time, but,
So that's helpful in understanding this.
you only have one entrance on Foster Street.
Yeah.
450 units, it's going to put a huge amount of traffic.
But Cheryl, you understand that that yellow area is zoned industrial. It's not going to stay empty, okay? So
But
Things change.
but it fills up with trucks, that's fine, because trucks aren't allowed on Foster Street anyway. They have to go the other
no,
way.
that's not true.
That's not true.
That's not true.
Just one thing, I have a
I
question.
just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Maybe we need to make it so that that part of Foster Street, they're not even allowed.
That you can't do that.
Yes, we can.
No,
You
yes,
can't.
sir.
For the green one,
Yeah,
since it's the smallest acreage,
yes.
inherently the building types would have to change.
The building types are going to change.
So
yeah.
what's the minimum number of stories that we expect to be a certain?
That's an excellent question. We would have to go back and test that to see how would we fit access, parking, and 150 units on that site.
Access parking
We'd have to, so we would have to test that, and it would be higher.
Yeah, because
So,
I mean,
that's a good point.
all of these are based off of the fact that we were expecting 150 units over 35 acres, right?
Right.
So inherently, we wanted smaller buildings because that's the makeup of the town. But if we really just want 150 units, we have to, I'm guessing, go to like 4 or 5 unit story heights to get into the 10.
That's what we would have to test, yeah. Do you remember, was there excluded land on that green parcel?
The green parcel, there is not excluded land. The concern for the green parcel is, again, site access is very tight up against Foster Street.
Yeah.
It's also
Wetlands on that
a tougher site to build on for housing, just because it is bracketed by 2 highways and a rail line.
But we would have,
But-
but you are absolutely correct, the building height would have to go up on that one, which may be fine in exchange for the fewer units.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah, yes.
That's,
I look at this and I see green and red being built up in industrial, and it means if someone's going to do something, they would have to do knockdowns, it'd be very expensive. I wonder if the AG would consider it a solution.
Residential is what you have to do, is a whole
Yellow area makes sense because it's close to houses, but the big problem there is the size, the scale of it. So what I keep on looking at, is there some way of breaking down that lot? Somehow someone subdividing it in some means before the zoning goes through. As far as the congestion and all the traffic on Foster Street, you could really cut down a lot of it if you had a shuttle service, electric shuttle service, and accommodate it in the yellow area, especially for the King Street people who can be car-free for the most part, but they would need a shuttle service to get to the depot. The other thing is, even though 3A
Excuse me.
legislation has a lot of flaws
can I
in it,
answer your point real
and
quick?
has a lot of openings that bother a lot of places. We are fortunate we have King Street to shore up some of this. But what it doesn't prohibit is having design guidelines. And we can put in design guidelines to not only have the development the way we want it, I think, but ensure it's low impact, sustainable, and energy efficient. Now, even though it's new construction and there are new building code guidelines that force them, that we can have additional design guidelines. You look at places like Acton, they say, okay, you should pair up design guidelines and sustainability and high efficiency along with zoning. This is the opportunity to do it. And what would be of interest would be units of concern to people, may be expensive. We tried to do this on Durkee Tree Farm, and unfortunately, we brought people in who had a plan for that. And unfortunately, they can make a little more money doing sort of the horrendous thing they did there, spreading everything out. But here, we have some choice here. And if people would be willing to pay X money for good quality units there, which would allow them both the access to the roads, 495 and 2, but also the commuter rail. And I think with design guidelines, we could eliminate some of that excess 300 unit down to 150 good units. And, have some affordable and so on. But with design guidelines, we could sort of up the quality there. Plus, it allows Littleton to pilot high efficiency, net zero energy, even prohibit fossil fuels if you want to, as other communities have done. I mean, you can have
This
high
is
design
zoning.
guidelines
We're
to go
dealing with
on.
zoning right now. We're trying to come
No,
up.
this is zoning. This can be done with the zoning.
I get it, but right now, we're trying to figure out where we want to put all of this.
Well,
So
all I'm
that's where we
saying
need
is
the
the
map.
yellow may be not such a bad place. It's really the scale of it that's our concern. And, yeah, you could also accommodate small coffee shops, small limited retail, like convenience store, which is what Jeff had mentioned before.
Okay, we're running out of time,
Yes,
so we'd like you to,
I have one more comment about the red.
Well, this is something I've thought about quite a bit. I actually have some stuff written up on this. So a lot of people have taken up airtime. These are reasonable concerns. This is an opportunity to do something that would be to our advantage, but scale is one of the concerns here.
Yes.
So maybe the issue is trying to cut down on the scale for the yellow area.
So, just to quickly answer that, sir,
Okay,
if you don't mind.
on the red parcel,
Yes.
I hate to make it more complicated, but could you look at splitting it up to reduce the density? I mean, I know you have this number formula, but if if it's not the entire parcel, if it's the parcel at Taylor or the parcel below it, would that get us to the 150 units?
We can look at that.
Okay.
We can look at what would happen if we break those
Yeah.
up. To the point of the yellow parcel that he was making,
Mhm.
we cannot split an
Right.
existing parcel. It would have to be legally split before the zoning went into it.
Yes, and maybe the
That's
owner.
still not a problem
would be
either.
Just letting you know,
Yeah.
but, yeah. So we can't take 10 acres out of it
We
now.
can't, but the owner could.
They can,
Yes,
correct.
that
okay.
is correct.
So can we get back to, because we only
Yeah,
have
just-
15 minutes left to get to the maps.
Take 5 minutes, or take 5 minutes just to look at the 3 different scenarios, write down your comments, and then I'll tell you what our next steps were planned to be. Knowing, by the way, that what is on the slide presentation for next steps doesn't take into account the red and the green, because we just heard about that tonight. So know that that is part of the next steps. So just have a quick look, just 5 minutes.
Because we only
Would
have-
you all like to see the information on there?
We'll take a look.
Yeah, I think the one on the cul-de-sac will make people have severe.
Do you want to recess or do you want to?
Yeah. That would be.
Depends on if the board members are talking or not.
I like your,
They're working together, so you have to do it. Chris.
well,
I live about here.
That's you. You wanna have us-
Yeah. Yeah, you won't be influencing any of the other groups, so yeah, that's.
We don't want.
No, we don't want
You
to.
won't be influencing the other groups, so.
Yeah, let them do their thing,
Right,
okay?
right. But there is another. There's another set you could do.
Oh, I see what she's saying, over there to look at them.
Okay, let's pick these.
I feel like you just. Am I on? Yeah, I'm gonna go to the restaurant.
Go ahead.
Which they use for.
Does that mean that we can't do
It would shift around. I can see why urban planners would want to look at that sort of thing, but people would be really, you're there.
It's different, see, that's why I picked the one that was farther So. So, I don't know why you couldn't build a mill building, mill type building right there. 6 stories, you call it. Whatever it is.
Consider building that.
These two are definitely. That's street under.
At the intersection.
That's
not an option. I went to see I don't care, I don't want to be part of that law. We still need more houses. That's in common ownership. I don't want
Yeah, so we're here, and so yeah, but we can still, but that means we can put the 150 on the red lots. Yeah, whatever, we only need the 150 to cover any lot.
to. And you got a building.
That's why I can't. So we've got about 5 minutes. John, thanks for 5
So, I mean, and it'll be built by the time they're building that deck, by the way, was the largest. And they built it right
Just from traffic standpoint, well, that's true, but people think they have a house.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was 5 minutes.
Come on, you have 10 minutes, wrap it up.
Okay, so I'm just going to let you all know what the next steps are. In which case it's a brand new lumber
These numbers.
All right, everybody, I think we'll go to the next step. Thank you. So obviously, our first next step, I was going to have you all report back on which option you like the best, but I think I know, so we won't do that. But I believe, clearly from what we heard tonight, our next steps are to go back and look at the green parcels and red parcels and some configuration of either of both and see what that looks like.
And other parcels too.
And we will certainly, yes, and the radius, thank you. We will certainly do that. I was going to have a new online questionnaire available on March 13th to March 20th, but it was only going to test this. So collectively, our team needs to get back together and figure out how we want to do that, because obviously if we put it out to the public, we want to have them commenting on all of the scenarios that we're testing. So ignore that date, please. So we will coordinate among ourselves and back with Mara and the planning board on that. But I think the biggest piece is to figure out where we want to go and how we're going to test that. Yes, sir.
So getting back to your schedule,
Yes.
I think it's painfully obvious that we're not going to be ready for Springtown meeting.
Okay.
I mean, I just don't think, I think there's too much ambiguity still with everything going on. I think we should keep going, obviously, and maybe have a presentation at Springtown meeting so people can realize what's going on, because a lot of people don't watch it, don't come, don't look at it, so, we're gonna have a captive audience there. Maybe the work that we're gonna have up to Springtown meeting, maybe we should present it then and keep it going, and maybe, I don't think you're gonna be able to wrap this all up by then. Or you tell me, but.
You all are the clients, so, if that's your
just don't think-
judgment, then that's fine. We'll coordinate on schedule.
I think with all the questions and everything else, I just don't see any way that we could have this all done for Springtown meeting if we're looking at all different parcels and different things like that.
Okay, that's fair enough. I appreciate that.
But-
We'll coordinate a schedule among ourselves and get back to you with what we think the schedule looks like from
Okay.
there.
We don't want to,
Yeah,
we know you've been rushing for spring, but I just,
okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, is the board?
No, I agree with you.
Yeah,
This is
I
not
just-
going to be ready.
Well, I
Not ready for
think.
prime time.
So Emily, thank you for all of your work.
Oh,
Yes.
this was so helpful. We really appreciate it. And just, there are resources here if you're interested, just so you know more. I put all the links there. And again, thank you all. So we will
Sorry
hopefully.
if we blindsided you.
No, we come here because we want to hear from you. So we
No.
really appreciate your comments tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone, for attending.
Yeah.
I wish we'd seen more people, but
Well, to that point, why was this meeting scheduled for 6 o'clock? That's almost impossible time for people with children to come.
It's all.
you know what, you can't, if it was later, there'd be some other reason. We do the best we
Meetings
can.
are scheduled for 7 o'clock.
That, not planning board meeting, sorry.
At 7:30, so I'm all for
It's the old,
ZBA always
regular
does
planning
that.
board meeting.
We're 6 o'clock, Cheryl, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. And then look who's in
Never.
So Gavin's
You should ask her, yeah, you should ask my dad about my day.
It's like a brutal.
it was a wild,
Wild West.
That was all.
Are we done? Is that what we're doing here now? She's just taking us all and, yes, I guess we ended it.
now, how are we doing this part? Are we skip that or?
We're going in executive session short. No, we gotta kick them all out.
I have to.
Okay. We have any bills or board business we really need to do? We wanted to-
Yes. You kind of have, yeah.
It's been a while. Very good to see you. Good to see you. Yeah. Thank you for your time here tonight. That was great. Cool. Very cool.
Most people wouldn't so I like this kind of stuff, so.
Yeah. Awesome.
Hearing public commentary.
Yeah. I always have to remind myself to look at everybody that's in the room.
I think the village zoning district maybe should.
Wait, okay, that's the one, yeah. It's the one where there was a whole abandoned house there. But it's, yeah, it's totally, yeah. Okay.
Did not recognize Catherine. Fantastic.
Well, what else you got?
Chris will be here shortly for critique for executive session.
I think that'd be extremely helpful, so.
Annual report, was that this? It looks great, Lauren.
I hope so.
Yeah?
Up until a week ago, it's been busy.
Hey, when's the next meeting?
Tomorrow night, and then not, and then the next following one would be April, what is it, 4th or 6th, whatever the first.
We're going back to the first meeting.
Well, yeah, and I'm not going to be here for the May one, because she did, that was so helpful.
Oh,
She
Catherine?
sent all of the meetings. So I think from July.
Oh, it's on your person now.
April 6th. I have it down on April 6th.
The DocuSign, I always think I've done it, and then it,
Did you hear that, April 6th? Yeah.
there's some
And
button
then
that I...
May,
Kind of put it May.
then May 4th.
Well, May 1st will be town meeting,
Right.
and then that Thursday, May 4th.
So I won't be here for that.
Okay, so we will want to talk tomorrow night about,
So if there's anything where you need my vote,
because we'll open 4 new public hearings.
what's new with you, Barla?
So,
okay.
Not much.
consider,
I chatted with your lovely wife at the town meeting.
You did, okay, good.
She's still
That's
going
what-
strong with teaching, or is she thinking?
Oh, she is counting the seconds until it's over.
Really? When is it over?
June 30th.
Oh, this is her last year? Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah, no, she is, I mean,
That's gonna
she likes
huge hole,
teaching,
that's
but
gonna be a huge hole in the,
she is just done with administration.
yeah.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, the administration is making that school just impossible to work in.
What are they doing?
Well,
spent the money.
You mean,
well, the superintendent keeps Harrington because he likes to have somebody that he can piss on.
so,
Does not talk to much of anybody, much less the vice assistant principal. So the assistant principal set up a lunatic schedule where every day is a different schedule. And the teachers have been complaining about it since September. And Harrington didn't know that there was a problem.
well, he sort of checked out probably.
Oh, totally checked out. I mean, he's on the spectrum to begin with, and then he's just. When he comes in at 10, and
You know, when I had kids there, when I was there, and we had occasion,
Somebody is making an eye on it.
and the assistant principal named Cheryl Temple. Was she? Because she's now at Russell Street. One of my neighbors.
Like I said,
Or you can think about a couple board meetings. Yeah, I think some of it would be useful, but rather than be confusing.
And
I'll take out those, like, not the last one, the next to last one, the dates.
so that's all.
yeah, no, I mean, she was at the high school. I mean, she ran the high school for a while. And she did discipline. The kids respected her. They thought she was
Well, when she's a public
Nothing on me,
citizen,
sorry.
back to being a public citizen, she should like get on the school committee. I mean, or like, you know, complain to
There's
the
a
school.
2-year do not compete.
Oh, really?
So she can't run the school committee.
No, not run, but just talk to them as a citizen.
I mean, most of them are, I mean, they think the schools are a business. A lot of them are business.
All right, are we,
Run it like a business.
do we throw everybody out?
Isn't it a business?
Well, we'll let them go for another 8 minutes. Do we have anything else we need to take care of while they're?
We've been on, we've
The only
been
board
on
business,
mine.
there were two things, annual report is in front of you.
How do you
Everybody
turn
took
it
at the
off?
annual report? Yep, we're good.
Great.
Yeah, that's great.
And then the bills, thank you very much.
We took care of that.
Well, there must be a lot
So we're
of
just waiting for
background
Chris?
noise.
What time's he?
7:45.
Is there anything we can do now that we're supposed to do tomorrow? No, we can't do that.
Well, the state is gonna want us to be in compliance.
Anyway,
So they're gonna be
know,
more ahead than they are now.
Can we leave this?
So are we
one
going to
alone?
continue with our meeting?
You go into executive session, because we're really not doing anything, right?
There's some good conversations going on, I would just leave it.
Shut these up.
So, I would think.
Oh, you have to keep it.
We need to work on this too, because if we don't know what's gonna happen, something's gonna happen. And it may be negative, but we will school something.
No, she is. She's the only one that teaches. She's the only one that teaches. No teachers really. She's
What these people are trying to I did say the
really good kid.
Tom
said that she wanted my daughter and school talking to each other.
My daughter did not.
Okay, this is what and then Plumman met with serious. I think it's very skilled. Working on my team.
So it is I'm shocked.
I don't know. Just Mark, remember?
Yeah, yeah.
And these, I think these are
Yeah, she sort of ran out of patience with the big man They're supposed to do the same thing all the time. All they can think about is their ego. I mean, they get to be the old famous doctor for this one thing. So,
I know there's some limits here. But, you know, see if we can put 150 units of use place on the, we still have all the things. And, yeah, it may not be too happy, but.
this isn't creative.
But maybe it's different.
Created that.
This satisfies the state, but it's in fact a little careful. This is where we're going to work. If I don't tell the state.
Yeah. Majority, it gives us most of the way what we want.
But she gives us more normal.
Yeah.
She's been out of it for 20
The green is so small, so close.
She got my father in our case. He had some problem with his patient.
Yeah, I know.
I want to be sure you get a message, go back, you know, just.
We were going to see it. We drove into Mass General and she signed. His number one guy. Looked at my house. Can I take a picture of your child? And it wasn't Naples, I could see it. We fixed it.
Come picture. There you go.
I'm still carry on. I was this?
She's really at the end of the
Not unexpected.
but she's slowed down a lot in the last 2 years. She says she should have left last year.
How was your drive?
Sometimes it takes me all back roads. Oh, for the, like, the middle of many nowheres. Yeah, it's nice to have a pension.
After 20 years, and if we ain't on
No, this is
Fast track.
somebody 50 years ago,
Easy.
wouldn't be that important.
Good. It's right time of day to be doing
Totally.
it.
Started out as German.
Okay, so Chris can walk us through executive session, and we can give Amber a few minutes to head out. Not yet.
Okay.
You know, like 68.
That way Amber doesn't have to stay in it.
Oh, she doesn't have to stay, she can go too?
Yeah.
You know, there are
Okay.
people who.
Do we want to tell her we're getting close?
Oh, and then we were on a tour with someone.
Amber, we're getting close. Huh? Sounded kind of spooky.
Okay, so are we closed with the public part or not?
Yeah, not yet, we have to. So Chris is happy to walk us through
Yeah, why don't you walk us
moving
through?
into executive session.
Want to start us off? Oh, do you want me to read it?
Read that.
Oh, my God.
So, real quick before we go into executive session, Bartlett and I had a question about the annual report. So, the recently sunsetted TDR working group, so that got sunsetted.
They're not meeting anymore.
Okay.
Means they could meet if they wanted to.
Is it active committee?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
No, it was just a question, so it's really up to Bartlett since he was the member on the committee.
Okay, I move that the planning board vote to enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing strategy with respect to the pending litigation, namely M&M Realty Trust versus the Littleton Planning Board, 22 miscellaneous 000489, and Homelight Realty Trust versus Planning Board, because the chair declares that doing so in open session would have a detrimental effect on the planning board's litigation position, and adjourn to at the conclusion of executive session without returning to open session. Perfect. I can't believe I wrote that.
Well, I second.
So I have the second. All those in favor of going into executive session signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Oh.
Anna?
Yes.
Bartlett?
Yes.
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 Jeff? Delisa, yes, and I'm a yes. So let's go into executive session.